I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year zero. Yeah, I'm going to keep this one short. It's late, but there's something bugging me. I've been hearing something lately, more and more, kind of put a bug in my ass when I heard Dave Smith mention it on his podcast. It makes me want to just slap myself when I hear a libertarian say Western culture. I have all the respect in the world for Dave Smith. I think he actually makes valid points on the immigration argument, but to bring up Western culture in such a monolithic way really pisses me off because I know he's smarter than that. I know he's smart enough to know that the people in Ithaca do not live like the people in New York City, and the people in Iowa certainly do not live like the people in New York, and the people in North Dakota have very little in common with the people in Florida. And to tie it all in with the people in Germany or the UK or Sweden or Denmark is a total farce. You can go to the Fifth Ward in Houston and then 35 minutes away to Katy, Texas, on the west side of Houston, and it's total different lifestyles, total different personalities, totally different ways of looking at the world. And so when I hear people say Western culture, and I want to ask, which culture is that? Which culture are we talking about? Are we talking about the culture that has embraced war across the entire world, bombing children and women and funeral processions and weddings for dominance? Because in my estimation, the term Western culture is a propaganda tool that has been cooked up in order to pacify the anti-war crowd in a lot of ways. That it at least gives those of us in the anti-war crowd some footing to stand on when and say, well, they're different than us. Yeah, it's bad that they're killing children, and Dave Smith, don't get me wrong, has never ever like acted as if it's not a bad thing. But the fact of the matter is that some people take it as, well, they are different than us. They're not the same as us. And it can be used in such a way to say, well, it's our culture versus theirs, right? And again, I know Dave Smith has never done this, but there are people that do it. There are people that cling on to it. That's part of the problem with this whole Western culture idea, and then acting as if it's objectively better when all of us know through the teachings of Mises that that's a value judgment and it's subjective. That is a subjective idea, because if you take somebody out of the heart of Afghanistan and bring them to America and introduce them to any of the dozens of cultures across this continent, they are going to suggest more than likely that the culture they come from is better because it's what they're familiar with. Now, in Dave Smith's mind, New York City culture is probably better than the culture of Laredo, Texas, directly on the border. But the culture of Laredo, Texas has much more in common with Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, than it does with New York City. So the idea that there's this Western culture is ridiculous. And he brings up the point of view, well, the people in Kenya live in these mud huts and are starving and this, that, and the other. It's a third world country, and they'll come over here and they'll vote Democrat. Okay, fine, whatever. You're probably right. I'll give you that. But if you go look at the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, Louisiana, you're not going to blame that on the people of the Ninth Ward, because you understand that the plight that they're in economically is the fault of the state. Well, the people in Kenya have a state that is also oppressing them and feeding off of them, as states do in their parasitic ways. They latch on to citizenries and they drain the resources, and they create these oppressive states of nature and of man. And in the entire argument that he lays forth, when he gets to the Western culture aspect, I think that's the one aspect that probably hasn't been thought out completely. That it's something he's heard and he's latched on to, that maybe he's never thought, oh, well, no, this isn't a single culture, because we're not a single culture. I live in the Gulf Coast. I live in Southeast Texas. I'm a truck driver. I've been to almost every state in the upper 48. I can tell you that the way people live are completely different. When you get up into, places like Michigan or Minnesota, and they don't have central air conditioning, they have window units in their homes because they don't need AC the way that we need AC down in the South. There are absolutely cultural differences when you go up to Iowa and you're asking or you're trying to talk to somebody about a specific type of food or a specific type of drink, and they have no clue what the hell you're talking about. So there's very little similarities. I've been to Frankfurt, Germany, and I've dealt with people over in Germany. They have very little in common with us. They ask all kinds of questions about things. But I've been to South Africa, where my wife's from, that considers themselves a Western democracy. And they had no idea what school buses were. When the first time my wife visited the United States, that was one of her big things. She wanted to visit a Walmart and she wanted to see a school bus. That was huge to her. Like, it's not the same thing. So there's not this monolithic Western culture. There's different cultures. There is this whole idea of diversity for a reason, and it's because, and this is the reason why the founders had laid out the federalist, or anti-federalist system, however you want to look at it. It was the confederation in which that the communities were able to police themselves and create, because they could create their own cultures within their own neighborhoods, within their own communities, within their own cities, within their own states. There's different cultures. They police themselves in different ways. It's the same reason that Alabama passed a heartbeat bill and California finds it completely obscene. It's the same reason that Austin is a sanctuary city, and you go down the road to Georgetown and they want to deport all illegal aliens. There's not this monolithic culture in the United States, let alone the Western, quote unquote, civilization, in which we're all colonized by the British and then had to completely, totally destroy sections of humanity to break free of this colonization. And so in my estimation, this idea of Western culture comes from the post World War II idea of the New World Order. And I'm not talking this in any conspiracy form. I'm talking about American primacy, having one single superpower. And the idea that we have to all identify as one. We have to identify Western Europe as being the same as the United States, when it's not. It's not the same at all. When you go to, let's say, the Netherlands, where it snows a lot, and go to Alaska where it snows a lot, I guarantee you they don't live the same. I'm pretty sure those in Alaska are a little bit more backwoods. You could call people rednecks or hillbillies. Well, you're identifying a separate culture from the urbanized culture of, let's say, a Chicago. These are different things. There's no Western culture monolith that dominates white people. I've always said I'm really, culturally, I'm more black than Obama ever was. Because I grew up in neighborhoods that were rough and tough, and we lived in government funded housing when I was a kid, and my parents paid more for fucking sending me and my brother to daycare so they could both work multiple jobs full time, and then they paid on our apartment that we lived in. Like, this is a completely different aspect of life. This isn't it's not the same culture as a Jeffrey Epstein. I don't even want to be lumped in and considered the same as Jeffrey Epstein. It's like I told a guy the other day, a good friend of mine, I'm like, yeah, because you have a lot more in common with Jeffrey Dahmer than you do with my wife Beatrix, who's not from the United States. There's not this monolithic thing that is the Western culture. This is a lie being perpetuated upon the people of the United States, of Europe, of the UK, of Sweden. They believe in this thing called Western culture. Well, I have nothing in common with a Canadian. I barely speak the same language. I don't know what the fuck a goddamn limey is talking about 90% of the time. What the fuck's this royal family bullshit? That's not my culture. There's no royalty where I come from. The only king I know of is the King of New York. That's the only king I recognize. So it really bugs me when I hear people fall into this Western culture, you know, philosophy. It's nonsense as far as I'm concerned. And to say that some cultures are objectively better than others, well, no, there's it's not, because you're putting a value on a culture, and value judgments are always subjective. There are Americans that have fled America to go live in Canada. Does that mean Canada is objectively better than America? There are Americans that have fled America to live in Mexico. Does that mean Mexico is objectively better? No, it's subjective. There are Americans that have joined ISIS. Does that mean ISIS is objectively better? No, it's all subjective. It has nothing to do with some objective reality. Now, if you want to conserve America and safeguard against a potential, you know, economic collapse to the best of your ability, and that you think that through politics that the system can be rolled back and that the Federal Reserve can be completely dismantled and that these wars can be ended, okay, fine. That's fine. Then vote Republican and enjoy yourself. But truth of the matter is, there hasn't been a fucking American that's voted for a smaller government or an election that's resulted in the majority of America voting in a smaller government. So the idea that America has this concept of liberty, and that Western culture appreciates freedom more than Afghanistan, where they never had a large centralized government. I don't know. Maybe Afghanis appreciated freedom more. They just had a different idea of freedom. Maybe freedom is necessarily more agrarian, less industrial, more self-dependent. I don't know. I don't know if you can have a liberty-oriented society built around industry. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I've read about a lot of different, liberty-oriented societies. If you look down, Michoacan. What's that little town? I think it's in Michoacan, Mexico, that kicked all the politicians out of their fucking town. I mean, that seems pretty liberty-oriented, you know? You got, you had this little coal mining place called Mooresnet, centuries ago, that had no central government. That was pretty liberty-oriented. The Pashtun in Afghanistan seemed pretty liberty-oriented as far as I'm concerned. But they're more agrarian. They're not looking to industrialize. So maybe you could, and I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I don't know. I haven't seen it. It seems like all the places that, cling to liberty are places like North Dakota or Idaho, not New York City or Chicago, Cincinnati. So I don't know. I don't know if it's even possible. I don't know if once you enter industrialization, are you so, distracted with the creation of product in consumerism that you forget to be free? You don't have time to be free anymore? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why it's turned out that way. I'm not going to accuse correlation and causation, but the idea that it's just, well, these people are going to come over here and vote Democrat. The government's going to get bigger, and they're going to spend a shitload of money, and it's going to create an economic collapse. Well, voting Republican just creates an economic collapse too. You know, because they just keep spending money as well. None of these people are making the government smaller. And I know Dave Smith is on the same page when he really like sits back and thinks about it, because that's why he supports Jacob Hornberger. When he sits back and he's like, well, neither of these fucking parties are worth a fuck. I mean, he's speaking my language there. So like, I'm not arguing at him or directing it at him. I'm just using what he said about Western culture that really just lit a fire under my ass, because I just don't buy that argument. I don't. You know, I kind of think that maybe we should start voting Democrat just to speed up the fucking process, just to get it over with, just to get the pain over with. Because either way this goes, it's not going to be pretty. It's probably going to look a lot like a Soviet collapse. It's not going to be this pretty, easygoing, you know what, I'm going to go my way, you're going to go yours. Very few divorces go that way. And a divorce that has this much at stake is definitely not going to be that easygoing. I promise you. It's going to get ugly, one way or the other. So, again, so short episode. I just wanted to vent on that. I really, that just bugged me, man. There is no such thing as Western culture. There's just not. There are white people, and if you want to say white people create these societies based on the colonization of the UK, that's fine. But when you start talking Western culture, I'm just like, wait. It seems to me like you are not necessarily defending the whole idea of American primacy, but you're giving the people that do defend the dominance and the world superpower, you're giving them a foothold. Well, yeah, we got to spread this Western culture, though, because it is objectively better. You know, it's so much better. Right? So I'm just not willing to go there. I'm not willing to give that much credence to any kind of idea that could fester into empire or colonization or whatever you want to call it. And I'm not necessarily all that concerned about a bunch of people from third world countries coming and voting for Democrat, because part of me thinks that the faster that they collapse this fucking system, the faster we can get on with living our fucking lives. And I've considered voting Democrat just to fucking kind of put my finger on the scale just a little bit. Because even though I don't believe I'm going to see freedom in my lifetime, I would definitely like my grandchildren to see it, experience it, you know. And it's feeding that same beast that the progressives use. It's feeding that same kind of idea that, well, we're the only major industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have health care for all. Yeah, well, we kind of fought a revolution so we weren't tied up in all the other bullshit that those countries were doing. kind of created our own cultures and ways of living. And I don't see any evidence showing that Americans are more liberty loving and freedom loving than anybody else in the world. I almost guarantee if you go to another educated society, like Japan or whatever it would be, an Eastern culture, I guess, maybe a Northern culture. I guess in Northern culture you would get an Anthony Samaroff, or is Ireland still west? Even though it's way up there. It's way up there for my taste, at least. Anyway, I would be willing to say if you get into any of these advanced nations, these places where people are formally educated, educating themselves on a mass level, you're going to find about the same percentage of people looking for freedom from their government as you do in the United States. Maybe not in the same ways, maybe not using the exact same texts, but generally you're going to find people that are unhappy with being ruled over and want freedom and want to be left the fuck alone. This is just my guess. I wouldn't think that you go to, India, they'd be like, well, I mean, we're a big fucking nation, and look what America's doing. All the wars they're starting. We ought to start a bunch of wars too. I'm not willing to buy into it. I'm just not willing to put it out there and accept it as a reality. I don't see it as the same thing. I don't consider myself part of a Texas culture, let alone a Western culture. So I don't know. I don't know how to process the idea of a Western culture other than to think that it's just another propaganda ploy that's been put out there and it's gained momentum, and it gives those people already susceptible to statism and already believing in America and USA a foothold to stand on to further the ideas of the state, because none of these people are voting for less government. They're not. They may vote for less taxes taken out of their check and more taxes taken out of yours, but they're not trying to limit the size of government. None of them. And so this false belief that allowing a bunch of fucking Mexicans or Hondurans, that a refugee crisis created by the United States sanctions and economic warfare and coups on these countries, not to mention the drug war, yada, yada, yada. And to think that they're going to come here and change America socialist, well, they ain't got far to go. So that's the real problem, is the fact that they ain't got far to go. Not the fact that they're going to vote for Democrats or socialists or Bernie Sanders or whatever the fuck. It's the fact that they ain't got far to go. That the country's ready for it. And by promoting the United States as part of a Western culture put right alongside every other country that has tried this form of democratic socialism that's invoked universal healthcare systems and bans on guns and all these things, we're not the same. Texas isn't even the same as Washington. Washington, D.C. isn't the same as Richmond, Virginia. We're not the same. We're certainly not the same as those people. No, if it were me, I would just avoid that term because it doesn't give credence to decentralization. It's actually buying into the talking points of this large centralized government in which North Dakota and Florida are governed under the same laws, and Los Angeles and Sacramento are governed under the same laws, and Las Vegas and Phoenix are governed under the same laws. And it makes no sense because the people are different. There's no reason that the people in Laredo, Texas, should be worried about their cousins in Nuevo Laredo coming to visit them. Just because some stranger 2,000 miles away in Philadelphia doesn't like it. I don't know, man. Just my point of view on the whole situation. That Western culture, that really triggers me like a little fucking snowflake. I almost melted there. Did you hear it? I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.